I can prove that the Economic Development Authority knew Epstein's companies are donating to Plaskett's political campaign. In her own deposition, she admits that she knew Epstein was traveling with and hanging around young women. She's changing tax law to benefit Epstein and Epstein class types. Plaskett is calling Epstein her friend! In 2019, Jeffrey Epstein was texting a sitting member of Congress during one of the most watched congressional testimonies of the year. That Congresswoman is Stacey Plaskett. But those messages were not the beginning of their relationship. And now, Stacey Plaskett, who I believe to be just another Epstein-class political puppet, is running to be the next governor of the US Virgin Islands. Let's see how she justifies texting Epstein during a congressional hearing.
I believe that Jeffrey Epstein had information, and I was going to get information to get at the truth.
Okay, so you had no involvement with Epstein prior to 2019 then, right? Cecile DeYoung, the First Lady of the US Virgin Islands, Epstein's right-hand woman, was not emailing Epstein back in 2014 to ask for donations for your campaign because she thought that Epstein would have a friend in Stacey Plaskett, right? Well, we're gonna find out, because today we'll be digging through Stacey Plaskett's closet to expose all the Epstein-related skeletons she has been hiding away. Alright, so super quick background on her. Both of her parents were born and raised in the US Virgin Islands. They moved to New York. Stacey Plaskett is born and raised in New York. She spends a majority of her career as a lawyer in New York, but in 2005, Plaskett decides to move back to the US Virgin Islands, and that's where her story really begins. Back in 2023, the US government sued JP Morgan over their financial involvement with Epstein. And from this lawsuit, we can get a lot of useful information, such as Stacey Plaskett's deposition under oath. Now, the first thing we learn from her deposition is after she moved to the island in 2005, she worked at a law firm called Nicholas Newman Logan up until 2007. Todd Newman and Hunter Logan of Nicholas Newman and Logan law firm do come up in the Epstein files a few times, mainly in relation to a business application Epstein is submitting to the University of Virgin Islands RT Park, for which Nicholas Newman and Logan will be doing the due diligence on behalf of RT Park. The University of Virgin Islands Research and Technology, aka RT Park, is an economic development program that entices and attracts businesses via significant tax incentives. And if you've seen my previous videos, we all know just how much Epstein loves his tax breaks. And in this email, we see that Epstein is going to pay the due diligence fee so that Nicholas Newman and Logan can take care of the due diligence process, which is meant to evaluate a company's financial and regulatory integrity before granting them these tax incentives and breaks. Frankly, this Nicholas Newman and Logan connection is meaningless and pales in comparison to the other Stacey Plaskett and Epstein dealings we're going to talk about in the rest of this video. However, I did think it was interesting to note the first job Stacey Plaskett worked at as soon as she got to the US Virgin Islands was for a company that had business dealings with Epstein and Epstein on as a client of sorts. Now, here's where things get a bit more interesting. In the deposition next, we learned that in 2007, after Nicholas Newman and Logan, Plaskett is out of nowhere hired as the legal counsel for the US Virgin Islands Economic Development Authority. Now, if you're wondering what the Economic Development Authority is, Plaskett answers this for us in the deposition. She says it's a semi-autonomous government agency which handles incentives to bring as well as grow businesses in the US Virgin Islands through various vehicles. And one of those vehicles just so happens to be a tax incentive program which allows businesses and individuals to receive tax reductions on federal, not just state, taxes for businesses and employment that they bring to the territory. Oh, by the way, the Economic Development Authority happens to be the agency that granted Epstein upwards of $300 million in tax exemptions during his residency at the US Virgin Islands. Now, in this portion of her deposition, we again get clarification that she joined the EDA in December of 2007 and she left in April of 2012. And this section really to me feels like her trying to absolve her responsibilities as the legal counsel of the EDA. She's asked, did you have any authority over decisions regarding EDA tax benefits? She says, no, I did not have authority over tax benefits at any time. Then she's asked, after you left, did you have any input over decisions regarding EDA tax benefits. This time she says, no, I did not after 2012. See the difference in the answers? I mean, she's not wrong when she says she did not have any authority over the tax benefits at any time because she's not voting on the tax benefits. But she absolutely did have input over the decisions because she is the legal counsel to the people voting on the tax benefits. They're coming to her for input. They're coming to her with legal concerns and determining their voting decisions based on the input they're getting from their legal counsel, Stacey Plaskett. Why else do you think Erica Kellerhals, Epstein's tax and business attorney, when emailing the Economic Development Authority in January of 2012 asking for Epstein's financial trust company's Economic Development Authority tax benefits to be extended, would also CC Stacey Plaskett in on this communication? Now, I'll be fair and give Plaskett a break for the year of 2007 and maybe even most of 2008. But we all know that in 2008, Jeffrey Epstein was convicted of being a predator. And don't let any politician fool you that they didn't know this was happening back in 2008, because if you Google Jeffrey Epstein, go to news, then adjust the time frame to custom range, let's say 01/01 2008 through 04/01 2012, which is when she left the EDA. What do you see? Jail time for millionaire in ... Sorry, I'm trying to not get demonetized, so just read the screen. Billionaire ... Jeffrey Epstein's year-long probe. Prince Andrew's link to ... Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein ... New York billionaire faces 50 million ... suit. Epstein faces ... probe. And these are all articles ranging from 2010, 2008, 2011, 2009. Was the legal counsel incapable of Googling the person they were going to give millions of dollars in tax benefits to? It actually gets a lot worse. I can prove that the Economic Development Authority knew of Epstein's 2008 conviction, but they did not care. Before we get to that, if you enjoy digging through the public catacombs we call the internet, please subscribe. Here's a letter being sent to Cecile DeYoung, the former First Lady of the US Virgin Islands and the manager of Epstein's financial trust company, regarding how the EDA/EDC, Economic Development Commission, and Economic Development Authority, you can kind of see that interchangeably for this context. They would like some additional information before they extend Epstein's tax benefits for his companies. And at the bottom, we see, in addition to Erica Kellerhals, his lawyer, and Stacey Plaskett, the EDA's legal counsel, Margarita Greenidge Benjamin, the compliance director of the EDC. Lucky for us, this lawsuit against JP Morgan is the gift that keeps on giving, because we also have a deposition from Margarita Benjamin, the compliance director of the EDC. They redacted her last name, but you can see here that they're talking about the benefits to the financial and Southern Trust Company of Epstein, and who at the EDA is responsible for extending benefits, etc. If you go down a bit more, the compliance director of the EDC, Margarita, is being asked about Epstein's Florida conviction. And the questioner says, and what was the nature of the Florida conviction? Margarita responds, sexual, if I recall, with a ... female and... So, EDC was aware of these charges in 2011? Yes. And they were aware that Epstein pled guilty to those charges? Yes. How was that fact evaluated by the EDC? There was no evaluation as it relates to the specific business operations that was approved for the benefits. So Epstein's conviction for procuring ... for sex had no bearing on the EDC's analysis of extending his tax benefits? No. Okay, so just to recap, the Economic Development Authority / Commission of the US Virgin Islands knew about Epstein's 2008 conviction for being a predator, and they simply did not care. They did not inquire, they did not investigate, because that's his private life, and this is his business life. Smack dab in the middle of Stacey Plaskett's 4 to 5 year term as their legal counsel. My God, Epstein must have just been providing such an insane amount of economic opportunity and development to this island that they would just look over this fact, right? Let's see, Exhibit 296 from the JP Morgan case. And mind you, this is the Economic Development Authority's public hearing, right? It is a public hearing, but for some reason, a page and a half as they start talking about the financial trust company and their tax benefits from the EDA is redacted for a public hearing. Your girl is ticked off. We're just gonna cool it. All right, let's see what type of economic development and opportunities Epstein provided to the US Virgin Islands to deserve, over the course of his residency, $300 million in tax benefits. And mind you, we have all the usual suspects at this hearing. We got Epstein's general lawyer, Darren Indyke. We got Epstein's business and tax lawyer, Erica Kellerhalls. And of course, we got Stacey Plaskett present. For starters, they're being asked on why they're lowering their employee count from 11 to 10. Yeah, that's right. They had, at most, 11 employees. One of whom is Cecile DeYoung, the First Lady of the US Virgin Islands at the time. Much jobs, many opportunities. What else? What have they done that makes them so awesome that they should receive millions of dollars in tax benefits every year? Well, according to Darren Indyke, Epstein's lawyer, they really like to promote from within. And, you know, they had this receptionist that they later promoted to an accountant. The other 2 points they make is, oh, they host science symposiums with Stephen Hawking and Nobel laureates. All right, my boyfriend just told me I pronounced that wrong. Nobel laureates. And high school students got to attend and ask them questions. And also they average about $180,000 yearly in donations. Well, if my math is correct, over the 20 years in which Epstein received about $300 million in tax benefits, averaging $180,000 in donations amounts to about $3.6 million, which is just a little over 1% of the tax benefits he got, while creating a total of 11 jobs. Quickly, I would like to note that Albert Bryant Jr. is the chairman of this committee. Now, if you've seen my Cecile DeYoung deep dive, you already know just what kind of an Epstein puppet Albert Bryant is. In the first 40 minutes of the video, I discuss in detail all the different ways in which Cecile DeYoung helped out Epstein while under his employment, such as in rehabilitating his public image after his 2008 conviction. Past the 40 minutes mark for the remainder of the video, we pull up all the emails showing the absolute cesspool of a political landscape on the US Virgin Islands, how politicians across multiple administrations and on various levels of government, without any regard to political affiliation, were in Epstein's pocket. Here's just a little sneak peek from that video. And now back to Stacey Plaskett. The EDC/EDA receives a FOIA request from a reporter in the name of Wayne Barrett. And this guy is legit. He's been looking into Epstein since like back in 2009. And Stacey Plaskett is the one who is responding to the FOIA request. And man, do I respect this guy because he is detailed. I mean, he's asking about the Island Global Yachting/American Yacht Harbor Company, which was 50% owned by Epstein, which I talk about that in the first part of my The First Lady Who Worked for Epstein video. But also he's asking some baller questions like, how did Epstein qualify for the EDC tax breaks considering he was not living in the Virgin Islands in 2009 because, you know, he was in jail and then under house arrest due to his 2008 conviction? That's a great question. And a lot more. Here's the document number and the data set if you want to read through all of it yourself. Now, I can't for the life of me figure out who wrote this particular document. It seems like notes from a meeting or an investigation, but it's not signed by anyone. I read it like 3 times. There's no hints as into who wrote it. But one interesting thing is FOIA came into Margarita Benjamin. She directed them to Stacey Plaskett. Stacey has fielded requests in prior circumstances, very careful in giving them exactly what was requested and to redact. To me, that sentence sounds like Stacey Plaskett knows how to play ball, only give the minimum of what is requested and to redact as much as she can. And as we know from the Cecile DeYoung video's second portion on political corruption, those who play ball with Epstein get to become the governor of the US Virgin Islands, or hold other political office. Would you like to take a guess where Stacey Plaskett goes to work after she's done playing ball at the Economic Development Authority/Commission? Did you guess Keller Halls, Epstein's business and tax attorney's law firm? Because if you did, you'd be correct. Now, at some point, I'm gonna make a video dedicated just to Erica Keller Halls because she absolutely deserves one. We've already run into her a lot in other videos, but for now, all you really need to know about her is she is the main business and tax attorney for Epstein. Most of the time when I run into a business or tax discussion in the files, Erica Keller Halls pops up. Additionally, she was managing his estate and also was an officer and a trustee in Epstein's foundations, just like Cecile DeYoung. And she does a lot of facilitating of relationships for Epstein. If Epstein doesn't want to take the lead, Erica Keller Halls will reach out on his behalf. And we know for a fact that Stacey Plaskett went to work for Erica Keller Halls, Epstein's business and tax attorney, from 2013 to 2014 because she admits to it in her deposition. Before starting to work for Keller Halls in 2013, she actually did run for political office back in 2012 after leaving the EDA, but in her 2012 run she lost. And she lost against Donna Christensen. I don't know about in 2012, but in 2014, according to this email, Donna Christensen was taking money from Epstein. Here it says, Rich as in Richard Kahn, Epstein's finance guy, cut the check and it will be picked up this week for Christensen and Otley. The other gubernatorial candidate in 2014, Kenneth Mapp, the guy that won, is trying to get a meeting with Epstein as well. And this check cutting to Donna's campaign and meeting arranging with Mapp is happening right before the November 4th, 2014 gubernatorial race. And oh look, Kenneth Mapp is asking Epstein for $50,000 for his 2018 gubernatorial race, which he lost against Epstein puppet Albert Bryan. The Epstein class funds both sides, so they win regardless of who we vote for. Going back to Stacey Plaskett, so she works for Epstein's business and tax attorney's law firm from 2013 to 2014. Then she runs for political office again, and this time in 2014 she wins. And who does she win against? Sean Malone. We've seen this name before in an email where Cecile DeYoung is asking Epstein to support Stacey Plaskett's campaign by donating to it and getting his friends, aka employees, to donate to her campaign. Cecile writes, Jeffrey, your help is needed. We're trying to get Stacey Plaskett elected to Congress. Sean Malone is running against her in the Democratic primary in August. Sean is the one who came after you in the Senate hearing last week. He is nasty and needs to be defeated, and we would have a friend in Stacey. She needs to raise about $75,000 between now and August. Do you think any of your friends would give to her campaign? Now think about that for a second. She's saying, hey, let's make sure Sean Malone, the guy that came after you, that came after Jeffrey Epstein in a Senate hearing, loses to Stacey Plaskett because Stacey Plaskett is gonna be a friend of ours, Jeffrey. She'll play ball. So let's make sure to donate to her campaign. And donate they did. Here's a receipt for Leslie Groff, Epstein's personal assistant, donating to Stacey Plaskett's 2014 campaign. Here's Erica Keller Halls confirming and thanking Darren Indyke, Epstein's general attorney, and Richard Kahn, Epstein's finance guy, for each donating $5,400 to Stacey Plaskett's 2016 campaign. Here's Leslie Groff, assistant to Jeffrey Epstein, coordinating her campaign donation to Stacey Plaskett's 2018 campaign. Here's a personal check from Jeffrey Epstein donating $5,400 to Stacey Plaskett's 2016 campaign. Here's another check from Epstein donating to Plaskett's 2018 campaign. For personal donations, that's all the direct evidence I found thus far. However, we do have some auxiliary data points to work off of. In response to Cecile's "we'll have a friend in Stacey Plaskett" email, Epstein did respond, "I'm sure Darren, Rich, Bella, and Anna would." So lawyer, finance guy, accountant is Bella Klein, Anna is the island manager. We have an email in 2018 from Epstein's assistant Leslie Groff directly to Stacey Plaskett asking, "Stacey, Jeffrey is asking for the maximum amount that is allowed. Can you let me know?" And she says, "Well, there's a general election and a primary. For each election, you can donate up to $2,700 individually, but because there's 2 elections, you can donate up to $5,400. And mind you, this is happening in 2018, 10 years after Epstein has already been convicted of being a predator, and 4 years into Plaskett's term in the US Congress. And we know during her time at the Economic Development Authority, they knew about Epstein's 2008 conviction. Yet here she is, still asking for money from the predator. And we also have this Daily Beast article in the files, where if you go to the bottom, you'll learn that in addition to his contributions in 2016, Khan also donated in 2018 and 2014, along with Epstein also donating in 2014 and Bella Klein. But when Jeffrey Epstein has your political careers back, there's mechanisms in addition to personal donations, which will allow you to get money for your political campaigns. Here's an email from Cecile DeYoung, First Lady, aka Epstein employee, aka manager of Epstein's Southern Trust Company, confirming with Epstein that they'll be donating $13,000 to Plaskett's 2014 campaign via the Southern Trust Company. Okay, great. So now Epstein's companies are donating to Plaskett's political campaign. But that's not all. Because you see this one big club that we are not in, but our politicians from both sides and the billionaires are in. They love to host these fancy cocktail dinner reception fundraisers for their political campaigns. Here's an invitation to Plaskett's 2016 campaign fundraiser cocktail reception that ended up in the Epstein files for some reason. I would also like to note it's being hosted by Erica Keller-Halls, Epstein's business and tax attorney, and David Bourne. Here's David Bourne. He was the chief legal counsel to the governor of the US Virgin Islands for 4 years. He was the chief legal counsel to Albert Bryan, who happens to be the governor that fired US Virgin Islands Attorney General Denise George when she starts sniffing around the Epstein estate and Epstein businesses, interviewing employees, and finally when she launched a lawsuit against JP Morgan, where we get a lot of this information from. In my opinion, Denise George was the one good bad bitch in the US Virgin Islands government, and Albert Bryan fired her. But that's all in the Cecile DeYoung video's second half. Here's a 2017 Plaskett meet and greet reception invitation sent to Epstein. Here's a 2018 Plaskett cocktail reception invitation sent to Epstein. Again, a host committee including Erica Keller-Halls, his lawyer, and Sebastiano Casanelli, whom we discussed in the Cecile DeYoung video extensively, and his involvement with Epstein, Cecile DeYoung, and just the general cesspool of corruption on the US Virgin Islands. That last one was in March of 2018. Here's another one in September of 2018. Again, host committee including Erica Keller-Halls and Sebastiano Casanelli. And you know, I'm thinking reception invitations on their own do not mean much because he ends up on a list and everyone on the list gets it. However, we do have this email from 2018 for a Plaskett Congress fundraiser, and here Yolanda, the lady coordinating it, has attached the July reception invitation asking Stacey Plaskett, "Here it is, please let me know if you would like me to send it to anyone." And Stacey Plaskett explicitly says, "If you would share this invitation with Jeffrey, I would be much appreciative. I would be grateful for his support and the support of those that he may direct to assist me." Yeah, it's one thing to be on a list and receive invitations from a politician in an automated manner. It's a whole nother thing for the politician to be like, "Yeah, please make sure this invitation gets to Jeffrey. I really want his support. I'd be so grateful for it." In 2018, 10 years after his conviction for being a predator. And just keep this name Leroy Daughter in mind here. It's gonna come up again in a very interesting manner. The final email for the reception/event type of fundraisers. Detail Consulting, who is coordinating these two events to support Congresswoman Stacey Plaskett's re-election campaign, reaches out to Jeffrey Epstein asking if he's going to attend any one of these events in 2018. And he says, host anonymous. They don't understand, and he says, donate max, no name. Geez, I wonder why he wants to remain anonymous. Before we proceed, I would like to just point out an observation that as soon as the questioning during Plaskett's deposition starts getting to the specifics of Plaskett's involvement with Epstein, she all of a sudden has amnesia. I mean, the answers just turn into, I don't recall, 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 I don't recall. I don't recall, I don't recall, which in my opinion is just such a legalese way of not having to answer the questions. But I want to focus on when Plaskett does actually answer some questions. Here she's being asked if she met in Epstein's New York home. She says yes. A slight tangent of, did you ever hear when Mr. Epstein traveled to the Virgin Islands, he often had young women with him? She asks what time frame ever. She says yes. When do you recall? I don't recall. Could have been before or after 2018. But going back to their meeting in Epstein's New York home, she's asked, what do you recall talking about? And Plaskett says, Virginia Islands politics, national politics, campaign contributions. Were you trying to raise money for the DCCC at the time? She said, I think I was always trying to raise money for the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. And it looks like she was supposed to raise about $250,000. She's then asked, was Mr. Epstein on the list of people who would be potential help in raising money for the DCCC? She says yes. Did you ask him to contribute to that? Yes. Apparently there's a $30,000 limit on how much an individual can contribute. She's asked, how much did you ask Mr. Epstein to give? Plaskett says the maximum. Then we learn that the DCCC rejected Mr. Epstein's contributions. Plaskett was informed by her chief of staff that the DCCC would be refusing to accept Epstein's contributions. She's asked, did you do anything to try to find out why the DCCC had rejected Mr. Epstein's donations? She says, I don't recall. She's asked, do you recall what you learned was the reason why the DCCC would not accept Mr. Epstein's contributions? And she says, yes, he did not pass their vetting. She's asked, did you assume that it was related to his status as a ... offender? And Plaskett responds, I was not sure of the totality of the circumstances. In my opinion, that is so weird. If I'm taking a bunch of money from a billionaire for my campaign, but then my party refuses to take money from him because he failed vetting, you can be sure as shit I want to know why, because I'm taking money from him. It could look bad on me, but Plaskett did not seem to want to know. Now, we do have an article from the St. Thomas source regarding Plaskett's 2014 campaign where she won against Sean Malone, the senator who was ripping Epstein a new butthole in the island Senate hearings. The Malone campaign manager basically accuses Plaskett's campaign of making false and frivolous assertions in its complaint to the Federal Election Commission, a complaint he and others believe was only filed in an effort to trivialize the very valid complaints made by both the Malone and the Emmett Hansen campaign in regards to Plaskett utilizing government house email lists to greatly expand the reach of her messages and linking her campaign's communication network to that of the DeYoung administration. Now, I don't really have a way to verify this, but we know from the Cecile DeYoung video just how embedded the DeYoungs are with Epstein, so I would not be surprised by this. We do have another accusation that I can verify from the Epstein files. In this article, it's discussed Democrat Stacey Plaskett pressed Jeffrey Epstein to fund a project that would allow her to completely outperform opposition. Remember that name Leroy Daughter? Emails show that Plaskett, using the pseudonym Leroy Daughter, asked Epstein to fund a one-year project to create a new voter roll file for the Virgin Islands. And here's that email. As you can see, it's sent from Leroy Daughter. You might be wondering to yourself, gee, Kat, what an odd pseudonym to take. Why would she use Leroy Daughter? Could it be because Plaskett's father's name is Leroy, making her literally Leroy's daughter? And if you're not convinced, it's okay, I got you, because she actually signed the email Stacey Plaskett. Well, let's see what Leroy daughter, aka Congresswoman Stacey Plaskett, is discussing with Epstein in 2017. She talks a little bit about the financial state of Virgin Islands, which is not great. Then she goes on to say they need to create a new voter file, that DeYoung's file is not updated and stale, that it would be almost a 1-year-long project developing the list of Virgin Islanders who have voted in several prior elections, current phone, email, physical address. This is the most important group to poll for messaging and later phone banking for sport and get to the polls. I, along with 2 to 3 individuals who assist in financing this project, will then use this information to make rational data-driven decisions about local elections, who for what positions, along with messaging and campaign work. I'd like to launch by next month. Would appreciate your partnership to make this happen. This project would allow us to completely outperform anyone in any race. Huh. Yeah, I'm sure using a predator billionaire's money to collect a bunch of citizens' phone numbers, emails, and addresses to bombard them with a bunch of campaign ads would probably improve your chances of winning, wouldn't it? The last thing I'm going to discuss in this email is she thought Epstein had the impression the U.S. Virgin Islands was in the PROMESA bill, and if you're not familiar with that, that is a bill to address Puerto Rico's massive public debt crisis by establishing a court-supervised debt restructuring process and creating an unelected fiscal oversight and management board for the territory's finances and approve austerity measures. And she ensures Epstein, we're absolutely not in the bill. I was able to negotiate with Treasury and gained the support of a bloc of Dems who held vote until the U.S. Virgin Islands and smaller territories were satisfied with the bill, and got a moderate Republican to offer the amendment to remove the small territories from the bill. Now that's odd considering just a few paragraphs ago she's talking about how the Virgin Islands is in great debt on top of facing economic stagnation, so you would think you would want to be part of a bill that might help your state deal with the massive debt that it's in. But naturally, I would not be surprised if Epstein does not want federal oversight over the finances of the US Virgin Islands, because then someone might be like, why isn't this guy paying the $300 million in taxes you guys have just decided to exempt him from? Might that not help you with your debt issue, US Virgin Island politicians? This whole email just kind of gives me quid pro quo vibes, like, hey, I want your money to do this project which will help me keep winning elections. Oh, so don't forget I did that thing to stop us from being in the bill that you didn't like. Kind of reminiscent of the Cecile DeYoung email where she was like, hey, make sure to pay my kids' tuition. Oh, also, do you have any legislative issues you would like to be handled? I have a really good relationship with the new crop of senators. Oh, by the way, well before the 2019 congressional hearing, during which Plaskett was texting Epstein, she has been meeting him in person and having phone calls with him for years. Back in 2014, right before her 2014 election, Erica Keller-Halls, Anne Rodriguez, Leslie Groff, and Stacey Plaskett are trying to schedule for Stacey to meet with Epstein, initially on his island. I think the tone of the emails are worth noting. Stacey Plaskett says, let me know what is convenient for Jeffrey. But then there's some scheduling conflicts, and Erica Keller-Halls asks if they can meet in the STC office rather than on the island. Everybody agrees. So Plaskett meets Epstein at the Southern Trust Company office, with Cecile DeYoung, of course, also involved. Mind you, in 2013 to 2014 timeframe, Plaskett was working for the Keller-Halls law firm. So naturally, Erica Keller-Halls, Epstein's business and tax attorney, is hooking up this meeting between Stacey Plaskett and Epstein right before Plaskett's 2014 election. The next one we have is right before her 2016 election, where they schedule a cell call for this phone conversation between Plaskett and Epstein. Leslie Groff lets Jeffrey Epstein know that Plaskett will be available for the next hour on her cell. So at the latest by 2016, Jeffrey Epstein and Stacey Plaskett already have each other's direct cell numbers. Next, we have a phone date. I don't know why they phrase it as such, but they do. On May 2nd between Congresswoman Stacey Plaskett and Jeffrey Epstein, which in other emails we find out Actually, Congresswoman Stacey Plaskett is asking if she could meet with Epstein face-to-face sometime soon, but Epstein's schedule does not really allow for that to happen, so they end up just doing a phone date. Now, we don't know exactly what they talked about, which is why you have phone calls instead of like Cecile DeYoung just writing everything out explicitly in email. See, Plaskett is a little smarter. But we can kind of grasp an idea because the title of the Leroy daughter email is follow up to our phone call, and it's sent 3 days after the May 2nd, 2017 phone call. So we can assume that at least some of this was discussed in their phone call. Next, in September of 2018, right before her 2018 election, Plaskett schedules to meet with Epstein in his New York home. And here it is also on Epstein's calendar, 1 p.m. meeting with Stacey Plaskett. And I thought it was kind of humorous that their meeting is right after his morning breakfast with Ehud Barak, the former Prime Minister of Israel. I believe this is the New York home meeting that was being referenced in the deposition where Stacey Plaskett asked him for $30,000 for the DCCC, which was then rejected by the DCCC for, gee, I wonder why. And her party not wanting money from Epstein does not seem to bother Plaskett at all, because she is then on January 7th of 2019 scheduling to meet with Epstein at his office at 4 p.m. And this email is CC to Cecile DeYoung, the office manager for SDC, and Anne Rodriguez, who sometimes works at SDC, but her main gig for Epstein is being the island manager. We've dug into Anne Rodriguez extensively, so I won't hash that out here. And Plaskett continues to meet with Epstein. Here's another appointment to meet with Epstein at his Southern Trust Company office scheduled for May 17th of 2019 by virtue of Erica Keller Halls. A few things I would like to point out. Now, let's say Stacey Plaskett never learned how to use Google, and she really wasn't aware of Epstein's 2008 conviction for the following 10 years. She just had no idea, even though she has been a sitting congresswoman since 2014 with a chief of staff of her own and probably PR people. The DCCC not accepting Epstein's money due to him failing vetting. The EDC in which she worked as the legal counsel knowing that he was a convicted predator. Let's just give her the biggest benefit of the doubt and say she just didn't know, okay? Well, in November of 2018, Miami Herald published an article called The Perversion of Justice that blew this case back into the mainstream like nothing else. And she's still meeting with him after that expose, after everyone who didn't know found out. She is still meeting with him. But considering the fact that in her own deposition, she admits that she knew Epstein was traveling with and hanging around young women, and everything else we've discussed in this video thus far, including during the time when she worked at the EDC knew that Epstein was a convicted predator and chose to ignore that fact in order to continue to give him millions of dollars in tax benefits. I mean, she must have been part of those discussions. She was their legal counsel. I personally do not buy her BS. I think she knew well before 2018 and kept taking his money and kept associating and working with him because it benefited her. But that's my opinion. I'm curious to hear what you guys think, so please put it down in the comments. Also, I do not buy Plaskett's excuse for why Epstein had her phone number.
Like many constituents, individuals get your phone number, they text you about issues, they speak with you. I have spoken with him about issues that are relevant, things that are going on in the Virgin Islands and elsewhere around the country.
Do you have your congressman's phone number? And I don't mean their office number, I mean their direct cell number. Do they respond to texts from you in the middle of congressional hearings? Do they schedule phone dates with you? Do they come to meet you at your office at your convenience? No? Me neither. I guess you have to be an ultra wealthy individual for them to be at your beck and call like that. We have an email where Epstein is hooking up and arranging a meeting between Chuck Schumer and Stacey Plaskett through Epstein's friend Kathy Rumler. They're both Democrats. I don't understand why Plaskett needs to go through Epstein to get this meeting to happen, but okay. Now the next section is a little complicated because it's dealing with tax code, but I do think it's important important, so bear with me. It's basically two bills that are going to be amendments or changes to the Internal Revenue Code for taxes, and both bills are introduced by Stacey Plaskett. For some context, these two bills have two areas they're dealing with. The first one is what qualifies as a bona fide resident of the U.S. Virgin Islands and what the tests used to determine residency are going to be. I'm less interested in that because it seems like they're not necessarily making the test less stringent, they're just simplifying it. The second area that I'll be focused on is the source income, or the source of your income. And the reason this is important is because, so it turns out, if you're a U.S. Virgin Islands resident and you handle your business there, you can argue that at least some portion of your income should be taxed by the U.S. Virgin Islands IRS instead of the federal U.S. IRS. And if you're a rich person, you want that to happen so that your tax benefits and incentives from the U.S. Virgin Islands Government Economic Development Authority / Commission can kick in. Not to bore you with the legalese, but the changes to the wording are: the code is amended by striking the period at the end and inserting the following: to the extent such income is attributable to an office or fixed place of business within the United States. Then in the second bill, we have pretty much the same phrasing, but then more importantly, for purposes of paragraph 2, income from activities within the United States which are of a preparatory or auxiliary character shall not be treated as income from the sources within the United States or as effectively connected with the conduct of a trade or business within the United States. So I'm not a tax expert. What I understand this change to be is narrowing what sources of income can count as from within the United States as opposed to perhaps from the US Virgin Islands. I think what Plaskett is trying to do here is make the argument, hey, like, you got an office in New York, you got employees in New York. Well, if what the employees in New York are doing is just a preparatory or auxiliary character to your business and income, then that income shall not be treated as from the United States, which means it should not be taxed by the United States federal IRS, but rather from the US Virgin Islands IRS, if that's where you're claiming the management and the main location of your business to be. Similarly, in Section 2, to the extent such income is attributable to an officer's fixed place of business within the United States. So she's adding that. So what I think she's trying to do there is, oh, you know, it's like taxable by the federal IRS if the income is attributable to an office in the United States rather than the US Virgin Islands, or your fixed place of businesses within the United States rather than the US Virgin Islands. Just overall narrowing down the arguments the federal IRS can make to count your income from being sourced from the United States mainland as opposed to a place like the US Virgin Islands. In my opinion, this obviously does not benefit the teachers, the construction workers, the nurses in the US Virgin Islands, not regular people, but a wealthy financier like Epstein, who has a home and an office in New York and one in Zora Ranch and spends some of his time in Paris or London, but he can claim his main offices in the US Virgin Islands, and any of his employees outside of the US Virgin Islands are just doing preparatory and auxiliary work. Therefore, more of his income should count as being sourced from the US Virgin Islands rather than US mainland, and therefore be taxed by the US Virgin Islands IRS rather than the federal IRS, and therefore should receive the tax incentives and benefits granted to him for nearly 2 decades from the Economic Development Authority / Commission of the US Virgin Islands. AKA, she's changing tax law to benefit Epstein and Epstein class types. Oh, by the way, if you go to the bottom of this bill, the remaining 40 pages is a justification from a firm called Winston and Strawn from two fellas named Peter Hebert and Barry Hart. And they're basically saying, here's all the reasons why we do need to make these changes to the tax law and how it's going to be a good thing. And by the way, oh, the current regulations aren't very friendly to the financial services type of businesses. And these two guys from Winston and Strawn do pop up before and after this bill is introduced. Epstein is talking about the requirements in relation to both bona fide residency and who he can ask some questions to. Mentions that Erica asked Stacey and hasn't gotten an answer so far. Erica should call Barry Hart of Winston and Strawn, who worked on proposed regulations and met with the Assistant Secretary of the Treasury. I believe Erica knows Barry. Erica, Epstein's business and tax attorney, says she'll call him today. He's also emailing Peter Niebert of Winston and Strawn, with Kathy Rumler mediating in a sense. Barry Hart is also CC'd in the conversation. He has a phone date with Peter Niebert. He is discussing drafts to the financial services legislation for the Virgin Islands with Barry Hart and a guy named William Blum, and a further discussion of the Virgin Islands Financial Services Improvement and Modernization Act with William Blum as well. And that is how Epstein operates. He doesn't explicitly go and say, do this for me. Instead, he funds political campaigns, he establishes those relationships, then he has his lawyers and lobbyists and other lawyers and lobbyists his lawyers and lobbyists know go reach out and make suggested changes to legislation on his behalf. Yet he's involved in the conversations on the back end, pulling the strings quietly. And now to my favorite part, the text messages. A quick shout out to the Washington Free Beacon, because I got 2 out of the 3 text message documents I'm going to show you from this article. They were on the ball and grabbed the receipts before the redactions kicked in. Now that she has been caught red-handed, she says Epstein is a reprehensible person.
Listen, I think Jeffrey Epstein is a reprehensible person. Absolutely disgusting.
She says she was just texting Epstein to get information out of him and that they were not friends.
I believe that Jeffrey Epstein had information and I was going to get information to get at the truth. Having a friendship with him is not something that I would deem to have.
Okay, then why is he texting you happy birthday 3 months after the hearing for which you were trying to get information out of him? And instead of just leaving it at thanks, you're like, how'd you know? Oh, I guess you told him, Stacey, while you were at his office. So teasingly, you're good. And Epstein responds, no, I'm bad, but I'm thoughtful. And then for some reason, you let him know that you're on your way back to St. Thomas and if he has a minute to talk. 3 months after the hearing you alleged to need information out of him for. And this is May 13th. That is, in fact, Stacey Plaskett's birthday. But it gets better. Oh, what's this? Another text conversation between Plaskett and Epstein. You ask him how things are going, whether he'll be in New York City. He asks you your opinion on a topic and you say, oh, that's a phone conversation. Let me know when you can talk. You guys have a little phone chat. He then asks you about backing various US Virgin Islands gubernatorial candidates. You then tell him, tell me when you're in New York. I'd love to come and talk with you about things while you're running to be the co-chair of the DPCC. And then you schedule to meet with him on September 24th in his New York home, which we already confirmed in the deposition you gave. Oh, what is this? Plaskett says, thanks so much for taking the time and sharing ideas and thoughts. I appreciate your support and hope I'm not presumptuous to consider you a friend. Plaskett is calling Epstein her friend. Willingly, no one is holding a gun to her head. And Epstein responds, privileged to be called friend. Aw, isn't that so sweet, guys? All right, now let's talk about the infamous congressional hearing texts between Plaskett and Epstein. If I'm to paraphrase Plaskett's public justification for these texts, it is that she wanted to get justice for Trump's victims. And as a prosecutor, sometimes you have to work with unsavory people to get information from them. All right, on the surface, that seems reasonable. Let's see what she got out of Epstein. Michael Cohen's congressional testimony during which Plaskett was texting Epstein took place on February 27th, 2019. Now you can go online and find videos of people who lined up the texts with the actual congressional hearing, but we're going to look at the raw text. Prior to the hearing, they're talking about island politics. Epstein is asking Plaskett if she's going to meet with Albert Bryan, the current governor of the US Virgin Islands, and at the time a gubernatorial candidate, and letting her know that he thinks that Mapp is going to run against Albert. And here's the date of the congressional hearing. Let's see what information she got out of him. Epstein says, great outfit. You look great. She says, thanks. Epstein asks, are you chewing? She says, not anymore. Smiley face. She says, chewing the interior of my mouth, bad habit from middle school. Epstein says, sweet. He's opened the door to question regarding who are the other henchmen at Trump organization. She says, yep, very aware and waiting my turn. He says, how much longer for you? She says, hours. Go to other meetings. Epstein says, Cohen brought up Rona, keeper of secrets. And she panics and goes, Rona, question mark, quick, I'm up next. Is that an acronym? Epstein goes, that's his assistant, Rona. And when Plaskett is done with her congressional hearing questioning, he tells her, good work. Financial statements exhibit, wild. She responds, wild. And then they talk a little more about it. He asks her takeaways. She says she's thinking. That's it, guys. This is the next day. The hearing is over. Then a couple weeks later, he sends her a New York Times article that's quite generous of Epstein's perspective, mind you. And that's the end of this particular conversation in the documents. Does it seem to you like she got all that much information out of Epstein? I mean, the only thing she really got was when Cohen brought up Rona, she learned who or what Rona was. Which, by the way, isn't a big secret or anything. If you just Google, what is Rona Trump? The first answer is going to be Rona Graff, Trump's executive assistant, the gatekeeper, because she worked in the Trump organization for like 30 years. Okay, but this is the AI summary. There was no AI summaries of this form back in 2019. So let's again do custom range for 2014 to 2019. Oh, look, it just grabbed it from Wikipedia to let you know Rona Graff is Donald Trump's executive assistant. So let me get this straight. She is such a good prosecutor, and she wanted justice for victims so bad that she needed to text Epstein what she could have easily Googled in about 5 seconds. Apparently, I should be a prosecutor or something because she wanted to get Trump, okay, while I'm investigating Epstein, I know who his island manager is. I know who his right-hand woman on the US Virgin Islands was. I know a bunch of politicians he has been paying. I know who's changing laws for him. I know a bunch of his lawyers. I know who his housekeeper is. I know who his personal assistant is. I know who his carpenter, his electrician, his landscapers are. And Plaskett didn't prepare enough for this super important hearing by, I don't know, just figuring out the baseline of who his executive assistant for 30-some years was, which, as I've shown you, was easily Googleable public information at the time. No, this is called either ad hoc or post hoc justification. Ad hoc being to justify something very specific, and post hoc being after the fact. In this case, I think it's both. And she's certainly never bothered trying to explain all the other stuff I've talked about in this particular video, because no one brings it up and most people don't know about it. And now she's gonna pretend like none of this ever happened.
Having a friendship with him is not something that I would deem to have. And so I'm just looking forward. I'm moving forward. And I think that that's what we as American people should do, is move forward.
Oh, did you hear that, guys? Not only is she moving forward, she now wants us to move forward. Interesting. The free beacon comes in clutch one more time to let us know. Actually, back in 2016, when she was running against a guy named Ackley in the US Virgin Islands. Oh wait, this news report just disappeared. But God bless the Internet Archives, we find out from the Virgin Islands Consortium that her running opponent, Mr. Ackley, assailed a congresswoman for receiving funds from Epstein, and that she should give that money to women in the territory who had been harmed. So actually, by 2016 at the latest, she knew. She knew for sure, and she did donate the money she got from Epstein to victims, but not in 2016, not in 2018, where she continued to take money from him and meet him in his New York home and office and have phone conversations and text threads where she calls him a friend. Not after the Miami Herald expose in 2018. No, she did after Epstein got arrested in 2019. 2019. She did after people started calling her out. She only donated that money away when it would have been absolute political self-deletion not to do so because the house of cards were collapsing and Epstein had been arrested finally. And now she's trying to become the next governor of the US Virgin Islands. And mind you, US Virgin Island governors, at least since De Jong, have all been taking money from Epstein and emailing and working with Epstein. So if the US Virgin Islands elects Stacey Plaskett, it's just going to be a continuation of the same. Please, people, stop putting Epstein-class puppets over you to rule you. I found a letter from citizens of the US Virgin Islands to an assistant US attorney where they're pleading with the attorneys to go after Ghislaine Maxwell to get information regarding former governor of the US Virgin Islands for facilitating Epstein's work on the island, his wife who ran Epstein's business for 20 years, politicians who signed his permits, and how nobody was blind to his traveling companions, how they knew but they were basically powerless to do anything about it. Look, this isn't about Democrats versus Republicans. Both sides are guilty. Politicians from both sides are implicated. I mean, Stacey Plaskett used to be a Republican before she switched parties over to the Democrats. This isn't about black, white, Hispanic. This is not about gay, straight, trans. It's not about Christian, Muslim, Jewish. This is about the literal demons and their henchmen ruling over us versus the American people. And frankly, really citizens of the entire world, because these demons are global. And right now, the Americans living in the US Virgin Islands have a chance to tell these demons, not in my backyard, no more. You're done. We're not voting for your puppets anymore. It's not going to be easy. You have a short period of time here, and the Epstein-class demons, I guarantee, will be funding both sides of the election. It won't matter if you vote Democrat or Republican. It never does. They always do. Your best bet is to pick a guy or gal from your own community who you guys know, trust, has a good head on their shoulders, has some integrity, hopefully has never been involved in politics before, and start knocking on doors to make sure everybody knows who the Epstein-class candidates are versus who a candidate from the people for the people might be. Thanks for watching. Good luck, and may God bless the citizens of the United States of America, not its politicians.